Hi, I'm Mandy Medley. I'm one of the worker owners at Pilsen Community Books, an independent bookstore and worker cooperative here in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago. And I'm so excited to welcome you here tonight for a special reading and celebration of Rachel Mennies' The Naomi Letters, out this spring from Boa Editions. It's a really beautiful book. Just a few notes about how this evening will go. First, I'll introduce our first two readers, and they will read, and then I'll introduce our star of the evening, Rachel, and then she'll read. And then there'll be time for a short conversation at the end. I should note, if for any reason the stream's interrupted because of the internet, just go to the Pilsen Community Books YouTube channel and we'll be sure to resume streaming there as soon as we can. And also, I would be remiss if I did not mention you can purchase the beautiful The Naomi Letters and all of our readers' books on our website, pilsencommunitybooks.com. Thanks for supporting independent bookstore and great free programming like tonight's event. And now, without further ado, I will introduce our first two readers. Ruth Awad is a Lebanese-American author of Set to Musical Wildfire, out in 2017 from Indiana Review Press, winner of the 2016 Michael Waters Poetry Prize and the 2018 Ohioana Book Award for Poetry. Alongside Rachel Mennies, she is the co-editor of The Familiar Wild on Dogs and Poetry, out 2020 from Sundress Publications. She is a 2021 NEA Poetry Fellow, the recipient of a 2020 and 2016 Ohio Arts Council Individual Excellence Award, and won the 2013 and 2012 Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Poetry Prize and the 2011 Copper Nickel Poetry Contest. Her work appears in Poetry, Poem a Day, The Believer, The New Republic, Pleiades, The Missouri Review, The Rumpus, and elsewhere. She has an MFA in Poetry from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and lives and writes in Columbus, Ohio. Maggie Smith is the author of Good Bones, The Well Speaks of Its Own Poison, Lamp of the Body, and the national bestseller Keep Moving, Notes on Loss, Creativity, and Change. Her latest collection of poems, Goldenrod, will be released in July 2021, coming up. Smith's poems and essays are widely published and anthologized, appearing in Best American Poetry, The New York Times, The New Yorker, The Paris Review, Plowshares, The Washington Post, The Guardian, and elsewhere. In 2016, her poem Good Bones went viral internationally and has been translated into nearly a dozen languages. Public Radio International called it the official poem of 2016. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ruth. Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks, Mandy. And thank you all for being here to celebrate Rachel's wonderful book, The Naomi Letters. My well-loved copy is here. If you haven't picked up a copy yet, please do. I feel like this would have been so life-changing to have in my hands several years ago when I realized, I am bisexual after all. It is a bisexual anthem that we've all been waiting for. I'm going to read some poems now and stop talking about my sexuality for a moment. And this has nothing to do with anything. This poem is largely about climate change and diaspora, so let's do it. The Bull of Heaven. Drought never stampedes. All the rain has to do is stop coming. Maybe you already knew this. It only takes 6 rainless days, and in Lebanon it means just 17 inches of rain since September. No rivers or wells to fill with rainwater. Farmers will have to dig to sate their crops if there's any groundwater left. When did you last have to remember water? Blue like a dream so real you wake up crying. I'm told King Solomon built his temple from our cedars, and in its innermost room God rested. Which prophet begged the sky and was promised nothing? When the fields ache, you'll know. Wake up, the cedars are burning, the same forest where the old God slept. The fires begin in the valley and sweep the mountainside. Ashes fell, and we held out our hands. I've never read that poem before. I kind of like to read new work in honor of a book launch, just because it feels special. So there you have it. This poem always reminds me of Maggie because she was generous enough to choose it for publication years ago. Thanks, Maggie. in the gloaming, in the roiling night. The hurt returns as it always intended. It is tender as the inside of my thighs. It is as blue too. O windless, wingless sky, show me your empire of loneliness. Let me spring from the jaws of what tried to kill me. Let me look at your face and see a heaven worth having, all your sorry angels falling off a piano bench, laughing. Do you burn because you remember darkness? Outside, the joy is clamoring. It is almost like the worst day of your life is ordinary for everyone else. I wrote this poem for my grandmother who recently passed. Before she left us, she was having such fevered dreams, and I kind of wanted to write a poem that met the space of her last moments on earth and the grief of of the folks that she left behind. Where is Yesbek? In front of the water, my love, bright as a beach ball, loud as a dinner bell, sweet as a fig. I'm finding new ways to mourn the lives I didn't live. And Tata is dying, gone to the mountains, to haunt my ring and divine the Turkish grounds in my cup. I wish you weren't dead. I wish you weren't dead. Let my future appear like a lover's soft hands, like a stranger's face framed by train window, and open the heart. Before she died, she fevered with visions. Where is Yesbek? Here, the cup says, a kettle, a journey, a pair. You'll have success in the city, a whole rabbit of it. A saw to split brother from brother, a great wheel at the bottom, you're traveling somewhere soon. A mountain for your joy, a ship for those you leave on the shore. The waves stinging like a song you can't listen to anymore. And I've been ending my readings lately with this last poem because it's probably the only hopeful poem I've ever written in my life. And perhaps the last of its kind. And I think it's just a poem that fits the mood of an impossible year and a half now. Goodness, year and a half. Moral inventory. What good is your goodness really, if it is undone as soon as it begins? I flew over an ocean slicked with plastic. I am still afraid of whales even though I know they're choking on our trash. I had money in my pocket from a job of casual corporate unkindness, gave it to anyone who asked. I want to be a better animal. I want to love what I can while I can. My dogs who caught in the grass, a song that fills my cup and gallops me under a hunter's moon. So what if I snag in her antlers? I once had a body that wasn't a body. It was a voice in a god's mouth. It was the holy vowel. Oh, animal, I thank you. Oh, flank, oh, wanting gut, say it matters. Tell me to begin again. Tell me, and I will. It is my absolute honor to introduce Maggie, a poet who has influenced so much of my work and has been a champion of it too. I can't wait to hear your poems, Maggie.
Oh my goodness. Ruth, I could listen to you read the phone book or a Perkins menu, like a really long Perkins menu. Like honestly, anything in your voice would be beautiful. It's such a privilege, honestly, and a gift to get to be here tonight, sandwiched between to readings by poets I admire so much, and just also, let it be said, humans I like so much. And so what we're losing by not being able to be together and go have a drink or coffee before or after this event, if we were all in the city, we gain by maybe having people join us in this space who wouldn't be able to join us otherwise. And maybe we wouldn't have been able to be together on a Thursday night in May, all in the same city. And here we are. So thank you and congratulations, Rachel. Oh my gosh, this book. Just what a gift. So I'm going to read just a few poems from my tiny galley of Goldenrod. There she is. Like the one that still has the mistakes in it, those. And the paper doesn't feel as good as it will, but it's like a half real thing. So I'll read a few poems from this, and then we'll get to hear some of the Naomi letters, and I'm so looking forward to it. So this is the title poem. This is Goldenrod. I'm no botanist. If you're the color of sulfur and growing at the roadside, you're goldenrod. You don't care what I call you, whatever your name is. You don't know your own name. But driving near Peoria, the sky pink-orange, the sun bobbing at the horizon, I see everything is what it is exactly, in spite of the words I use. Black cows, barns falling in on themselves. You, dear flowers born with a highway view. Forgive me if I've mistaken you. Goldenrod, whatever your name is, you are with your own kind. Look, the meadow is a mirror full of you, your reflection repeating. Whatever you are, I see you, wild yellow, and I would let you name me. All right. This poem is just a wee little thing called Starlings, which we have a lot of here in Central Ohio. I think they're invasive, actually, but unlike stink bugs, they're beautiful, and so we let them stay. Starlings. The starlings choose one piece of sky above the river and pour themselves in. They must be 1,000 arrows pointing in unison one way, then another. That bit of blue doesn't belong to them, and they don't belong to the sky or to the earth or to us. Isn't that what you've been taught? Nothing is ours. Haven't you learned to keep the loosest possible hold? The small portion of sky boils with birds. Near the river's edge, one birch has a knot so much like an eye you think it sees you, but of course it doesn't. All right. I made sort of a joke after Good Bones went viral that I just wanted to write poems about sticks and rocks after that, and no one would have any expectations that I would be writing some like anthem of any kind. And I did, in fact, exactly that. So this is a poem called Stone. I was only half joking. Anything the stone knows, it knows from experience. If the stone knows touch, it has the rain's cool lavishing of attention to thank. If it knows heat in my hand, sun-warmed, dry and smooth as a cheek, then light is where it can direct its gratitude. When I close my eyes, the lids glow. They're learning together to be stones. What does the stone know today that it didn't know yesterday or the day before? Violence, too, is a teacher. The rain drilling a pinhole A tiny mouth in the stone, a tiny ear or eye over years is a lesson in patience, but not only patience. The shoe scuffing it down the pavement is a lesson. The stone can be broken against its brother over and over until together they dazzle with fire. I don't think I've ever read that poem before. I'll read one more. What will it be? Oh, that's kind of sad. They're both kind of sad. I'm going to go with sad poem A over sad poem B. It has been a long year and a half. This poem is called Wild. I've talked so much about loving the world without any idea how to do it. Something about turning the other cheek, something feeding the mouth that bites you. The world I'm trying to love is all teeth and need, all gray mange, but I can't resent the wolf for pulling the lamb down, even in front of his mother. I can't be moved by bleeding, a limp throat. The wolf has her own crying young. I've talked so much about loving the world. Is this how it's done? I am offering the only thing I have. I am holding out my hand, feeding myself to the hungry future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie and Ruth. That was wonderful. And now it's my honor to introduce the poet for whom we are all here tonight, Rachel Mennies. And again, we're celebrating the Naomi Letters. Rachel Mennies is the author of the Naomi Letters, out this spring from Boa Editions, and The Glad Hand of God Points Backwards, out from Texas Tech University Press in 2014, which was winner of the Walt McDonald First Book Prize in Poetry and finalist for a National Jewish Book Award. Her poems and essays have been published at The Believer, American Poetry Review, Kenyon Review, Poetry Foundation, and elsewhere. She serves as the book review editor for AGNI and the series editor since 2016 of the Walt McDonald First Book Prize in Poetry at Texas Tech University Press. Originally from the Philadelphia area, Mennies currently lives in Chicago, which we're very excited about, where she works as a writer, editor, and adjunct professor. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you, Rachel.
Oh, hello, everybody. It is just, I just feel like my cup runneth over to spend the night with Pilsen Community Bookstore here in Chicago, a bookstore that I love so much, and am so eager to finally put my human form in, like go and see and touch books and smell them and get to have that experience again soon. And to be here tonight with Ruth and with Maggie, two poets whose work I've admired from the get, and who's, as Maggie said, just human beings that I love with my entire self, with my whole chest. It is such a gift to get to have heard your work, and I'm overwhelmed with joy. So I'm gonna read tonight from the Naomi Letters. And I want to say first, also as a Chicagoan reading in Chicago, that I have a pretty intense like soundproofing thing jerry-rigged in front of me, but nothing can ever trump the train, which is right over there. So if you hear, I've been referring to it honestly as like ocean waves. If you kind of just hear some lulling, static in the background, I'll try to pause if two trains are coming at once, but otherwise I think we're just going to rock with it. So I'm going to start tonight pretty early in the collection and read mostly from the beginning. And I've been thinking a lot about beginnings and transitions and just sort of coming back to things because of the time that we're in right now. I feel very like emotionally soft-bellied and tender and tentative, and I'm taking very small steps, both literally and figuratively, into the world after, as so many of us have, so much time away from it. And when I wrote this book 5 years ago in its early drafts, I was doing the same thing for very different reasons. I was coming out of a really intense and difficult period of mental illness, and I was very slowly starting to sort of peek my head out from behind the curtain and say, like, what is the world like? Is it, I think I still want to be here. I do actually really want to be here. And as I was working through these poems, sort of found my way back to it. So I've been thinking about that a lot as I'm reading this book in a world I could never have imagined 5 years later, right, in the middle of a pandemic. And so I'm in sort of honor of all that newness. I'm going to read mostly from the beginning tonight. So this is the first poem from inside the first section, which is July 10th, 2016. Yesterday, Naomi, a man jumped to his death from the bridge beside my house. A runner found his body on the path 50 yards below, lying in a shape I cannot stop imagining. Does it matter that I once threw pebbles over this bridge to see how fast they'd fall? I imagined my body the size of 100 small stones moving in unison. How I longed for the rock's silence once they reached the ground. But I could never lift both of my feet from the earth at once. Today, I press my cheek to the bridge-facing window, feel the sun's heat gathering at the border of the pane. Today, I watch the cut red tulips open towards the waning light. I have so much more to tell you about being alive. So there are moments in this collection where the speaker, for one reason or another, doesn't send the letters that she writes to Naomi, who's the subject of, perhaps unsurprisingly, of the entire collection. And some are unsent, so they're finished, but the speaker, for whatever reason, chooses not to send them, or they're unfinished, they're abandoned. And the titles do some work to kind of signal that. And this is the first unsent draft in the collection, which follows the poem that I just read. One of the great projects of this book was being in conversation with other poets. There's a pretty extensive works cited at the end, which was a joy to get to put together, just sort of like everything I love, all the books that were on my bookshelf in 2016, 2017. I had been rereading Maggie Nelson's Bluets, and the Bowerbird in Bluets had embedded itself into my brain. So the Bowerbird appears here sort of in homage to her and to that book. And I'll mention, just for background, because it's just so freaking cool, that bowerbirds build nests of random blue things to court a mate. And that is nothing, no poem will ever touch how incredible that fact is. And I've been captivated with it ever since I first learned it. So there's a little piece of that in this poem, in conversation with Bluets, in conversation with nature, and just awe. So this is unsent draft. If I could keep her company in the blue bed, if I could join the assembled birds arrowed towards the greening park, if I could desire a bowerbird instead of her, I could feel migration as instinct and follow it. If I could desire a bowerbird instead of her, I could feel desire as instinct and follow it. If I didn't know her black brows move when she sleeps, as if remembering and forgetting an idea. If I didn't know she sleeps unclothed, even in winter when the birds are gone. If she said, read to me, I would say, how? If she said, please, I would say, each female bowerbird mates only once. August 7th, 2016. One night, a man who slept beside me said, if I put my ear on your jaw while you sleep, I can hear your teeth grinding. He didn't know I couldn't sleep, that I felt him listen as my body chewed its day to dust. As children, Naomi, my sister, and I searched the Delaware beaches for conchs, native thousands of miles south. We put the ersatz shells to our ears and hummed. None matched the oceans rolling right across the Cape. I whittled my molars to knife points in the dark, listening for the waves. As children, our arguments about what was sex always made their way back to the mouth. How the mandible cups the throat's soft pillow. I couldn't know as a child how close my desire lives to fear. how I'd open my jaw to the man's cock the next night, testing him. There's still something so surreal about reading, like, especially the really sexy poems when there's like dirty dishes right there and like dirty laundry right here. And I'm in my house, and I don't know, that part, that was always a little strange for me at public readings, but this is just that weird, like, you kind of do the weird, like, Clark Kent Superman thing, and then you're like, oh yeah, this is also your life, and it's all happening in this one room. Just a little moment of honesty. So these next two that I'm going to read are kind of a pair. They started out as one long poem, and I couldn't get it to work. And finally, a friend who was reading the manuscript in its early draft was like, maybe you split some of these and make them shorter, which I had originally, the early drafts, all the letters were pretty long. And this one I think is they work nicely in shortness. So this is August 18th, 2016. In the light, Naomi, the body's perimeter glows. I stretched it long this morning, my knees crashing together like a tumbling wall, and remembered what you wrote to me. Do not grieve what lives beside you, ready for you to touch her. This, at least, I can show you. How carefully you loved this shape, the one I repair, then deprive with the same two hands. The new bottle says 1 milligram per tablet, not to exceed 1 tablet a day. The uneaten peach sags in its skin next to the knives. August 23rd, 2016. In an hour, I'll head to the city garden. With Molly and Anne, I'll pull the last summer chard from the ground. We'll collect the final season strawberries, the scallions that grow to the size of an arm. I will reach for the highest service berry, named for death, how the tree first blooms in the spring once the soil thaws soft enough for a burial. I've learned to harvest one berry at a time, to inspect their skin before placing them on the scale with the others. This way they pop on the teeth at their sweetest. Their tiny seeds, floral and heady like almonds. If you want a pound of them, Naomi, I will bring you a pound. If you want the tree, I will bring you the tree. So this next one is a request from Ruth. And in particular, I think, I was saying this earlier when we were kind of chit-chatting before the event started, the moment in the writing of this collection where I sort of realized that one of the missions was going to be this question of betweenness and uncertainty and bisexuality and like multipleness, multiplicity, that trying to figure out one singular way to approach like identity in this collection was a fool's errand, and to leave space for all of the sort of possibility that being perpetually uncertain can contain, which, being a person who is anxious, is literally counter to every single impulse I have in my body. Always wishing for certainty and naming and categorizing. So this is a poem that I come back to sometimes, even just when I need to sit with myself and say, remember that time you realized it was okay not to know something? And this poem, the poem quoted, I think this is the first poem I read tonight that actually quotes from another poem. In the collection, they're italicized, and I haven't quite still figured out a smooth way to like italicize my voice in a Zoom reading. But I'll just note that there's a couple lines in here that come from Sharon Olds' book Odes, which is just an absolute banger book, and very much was reading on the nightstand as I was working on this book. September 5th, 2016. I want to read you a poem. Pink sky in the morning, it opens. A girl's sky. When you look at me, do you see a woman who only knows how to love a man? These were the only stories read to me. This fault too is mine alone. Slowly the trees become visible, Olds writes, and the spaces between them. This line makes me think of you, the white space in your letters. All my life, I have looked out at the world and never seen between. I clung to each tree I could touch without moving. But here you are, Naomi, and I write to you at dawn. Imagine being able to walk into the woods without fear. The black sky holds all colors close. Anything could happen. I will wait here, reading for the sun to rise, to show you what it decides. September 10th, 2016. In one version of the story, I find you by way of several minor accidents. A girl in high school used to tell us, look for the guys who drive stick. It means they know what they're doing. Ask them for a ride, she'd say. Make them show you. That winter, 2 boys nearly died speeding down the town's back roads. That winter, I bent over a boy in his borrowed car. His became the first body I studied besides my own. Alone after, I would reach for the electric toothbrush, the wooden spoon, and search for the places he lit for a moment, then darkened. I thought myself the only animal in a frozen city full of men, but I was wrong. I thought I'd starve, but I was wrong. Let's see. I am going to read the next poem. This kind of, I think, yes, we're pulling from the summer section into the fall section. So I'm going to read a couple poems from the second section, and then I have one more from winter to close us out for the night on the poetry reading side. This one, there was a moment in college where there's a quote in this poem from an Italian professor to a group of students, which is something that I pulled from my life in thinking about like literary love stories. This is particularly about Petrarch and Lara, his great love, and sort of what I became fixated on in that class was sort of like this dude fell in love and made a sonnet form that we still write in, I don't know, 800 years later. And that finally made its way into a poem, which is this poem. And I think also possibly of note that Petrarch is the only cis dude quoted in this collection. So shout out to Petrarch. As far as I know, I can't ask him, but yeah, this is with a little bit of Petrarch, October 6th, 2016. I told someone about you, Naomi. She asked me, are you writing her love letters? The rest of my mail, bills, coupons, catalogs, the sweaters I buy online. I answered my friend, I don't know what to call them. I gave her a piece of truth as the whole, the simplest kind of lie. This morning I thought of Petrarch and Lara, whose love I first studied in college. My Italian professor told us, all women students, he saw her once by a fountain in the year 1327, and he loved her forever, but she refused him. We sat in a circle around him, our notebooks open. At the time, I thought the sonnet a powerful gift, that a man's desire for a woman gave us a pattern to call love. Today, if I write a sonnet, it is always Petrarch's. How the poem's turn arrives in its midlife, not its end. I struggled in my younger days with a keen but constant and pure attachment, Petrarch wrote in his letters. My youth was gone before I realized it. Perhaps love is not a moment's urge, but instead a formal overlay. How the poem turns in your hands while I wait. All right, so I have one more from fall and then one from winter, and that will close us out. This is October 10th, 2016. I stopped desiring delicate things when I ceased at last to wish myself delicate. I used to walk in circles for hours to make my hips the width of a male shadow. I'd apply red lipstick, then call my reflection beautiful. I still couldn't lift the mirror into my arms. I'm trying to believe my body needs no repair, Naomi. As a child, I owned 2 favorite sweaters, the same boxy Land's End crew in orange and yellow. I declined my full-skirted closet daily in favor of their worn-in softness. 20 years later, I return my body to the sunny rectangle of its heart. In dreams, I rub the lipstick against your soft cheek. So to close, I'm going to actually read from the book in my hands, which I've learned that is a crutch when I'm on Zoom, because all of my early Zoom readings were like this, but it is nice to have the object. So I'm going to close with one from, it's the first poem in Winter. And in the book, as we move from summer to fall to winter, in the early stages of love, the speaker is depending on this new love and discovery to maybe help her through her struggles. And maybe others in here can relate, right? You're going through some shit, you fall in love, you think this is going to solve everything. This person is going to be the tugboat that is going to pull me out of my despair. And of course, it's never that simple. So as winter arrives in Pittsburgh, where the book is set and where I lived when I was writing this book, the speaker sort of realizes maybe the difficulty of that and starts dealing with things as they arise again. So this is the first poem that kind of opens that that section, that setting. And there's a couple lines in the beginning from Adrienne Rich's, again, just book of all books, diving into the wreck. January 3rd, 2017. This morning, after some time away, I opened to a random page in diving into the wreck and found you sitting there, stirring rice, ironing a skirt, typing a manuscript till dawn, trying to make a call from a phone booth. I think of that phone sex preamble. What are you wearing? I might ask you instead, Naomi, where would your hands touch me first? Would they reach for my hair, my mouth, my belt buckle? And in the time that passes until your letter reaches my door, what else and what else? And again. Rich writes, certain words occur to let me know she's a woman of my time. Here's my fantasy. Sitting on the arm of your chair, watching you as you labor between the various privacies of your inner life. In the dark, I see your arm moving over the page, a plane's wing casting its shadow over the city below. The felled world underneath you, bent over and dreaming. Thanks all. We're going to chat now. We've got time for chat, so stick around. I'm very excited for this chat.
Great. I can put you all three on the screen, or I can just toggle. So.
Oh yeah, all three would be great, actually. Yeah,
cool.
That would be lovely.
Sure. Good thing your outfits all coordinate beautifully.
Oh. Hi, friends.
Hi, that was gorgeous.
Wanted to hear those poems read out loud after I've been eating them for like the past month. I don't know. What is time? What a joy to hear it come from your own self, Rachel. Can you talk a little bit about like how autobiographical this is and how much you are playing with persona in this collection, if applicable?
Yeah, I actually I just had this conversation with my cousin messaged me on Instagram the other day, and she was like, I have some questions for you about this book, and that was one. And it's a question that I really cherish because I feel very much like if I had to pitch a tent on the planet that is the poetic like, I don't know, modes and styles, I feel very kin to confessional poetry. I know Maggie and I have talked this out in some lovely AWP panels of past. I don't really have another framework to like imagine from. And this book is a really good example of ways in which I have sort of played with maybe like composite or touching on persona, but sort of always as a way to sort of help make sense of my own life and my own lenses of the world. And so to that end, the way that I've been describing Naomi to people is sort of like a composite some sort of like something sitting between real and not real, like a composite fiction, which is to say the composite is based on real people that I know. This is not a woman with a social security number and an address that exists. She's absolutely a creation. The I in this book was built by the truths of my life. And in the beginning, when I was working on this book, I'm really grateful actually for what you said at the beginning, Ruth, when you were like, a few years ago, I had sort of this epiphanic moment about my sexuality. And I've been thinking about this a lot as somebody who saw the fullness of herself in that way as an adult and not as a young person. There's a line in a poem that I have that I cut from this collection that was something like, I knew, but I mistrusted my knowing, right? That there was always a part of me that, especially when you live in largely heterosexual society and you're attracted to people across gender, it can feel sort of like an ongoing self-denial, like what do I actually feel and who do I actually love? And this book gave me the opportunity to say, well, I'm going to just play in this space that I built for me and maybe not answer any of these questions, but ask them on the page. And Naomi became the person that I had that conversation with for the first time. So it was also a way for me to sort of like tease out in the way that I really know how, which is through writing, to kind of get to the truth of the thing about myself. So that's in as much as persona exists in the book, Naomi is probably the most fictionalized sort of presence in the book. The other people that populate the collection, the poem I read tonight about my sister in the Delaware beaches, like that is a thing we used to do, right? The family members and the poetry professors and the exes, that's all very much like I only have one framework. Like that they have social security numbers and addresses, to put it that way. Yeah.
That is such a relief to hear. I feel like I see a lot of pushback about like, I am not the speaker in my poems. You hear that in the poetry discourse a lot. And I feel like it's almost like, I don't know, like we're supposed to adhere to that, but I don't adhere to that in my heart and in my poetics at all. Like I am always the speaker in my poems unless I say explicitly otherwise, or unless like with my first collection, I worked with persona in my family, but like it's very explicit when I'm working in persona. The rest of the time it's like me.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Rachel, you said something just now about cutting a poem. So how much, maybe this is an odd question, but how much sort of like overflow from this book exists, and how did you go about that sort of painstaking process of kind of curating and ordering? And obviously, if this is a composite person and these aren't verbatim letters, like even choosing the dates, like how did the seasons, how did the whole thing kind of come together? I'm so curious.
Yeah, this book will never happen. I'll never write another book like this one in that way, because I started working on this collection by getting up in the pre-dawn, which is all over this book. Like everything is dawn, dawn, dawn. It was like, that's when I was writing. It was before I had to take the dog out, was kind of sliding into that hour between like 6 and 7, and was writing about maybe like 3 to 4 days a week. And I was working in Scrivener, which I mention only because it's important to the overflow question. Scrivener is a word processing software where you basically like end up with sticky notes. And so I had each like letter was its own little page or sticky note. And I just had on the left-hand side of this software, like 40, then 50, then 60, then 75, and then 80. And I was dating them because I thought that eventually I'd want to come back and give them real titles. I had not conceived of this as a collection of epistolary poems in the beginning. I was like, these are notes that in a couple years I will somehow be blessed with 2 weeks off, and I will cart them somewhere and I will maybe polish them into poems. And I realized maybe in like what now is the book's fall that I actually think I'm writing in form, and this is the form for these poems. And so the order is not exactly, it's not exactly in the order that I wrote them, but it's closer than any other book I will ever write again, because I didn't then sit down and say, I have 50 poems. We've all seen the and probably also done, I did this with my first book, the photo of the poet with all the printed out pages on the floor. Yeah. Or stuck to the wall. And there's only so much moving around you can do when you're telling a chronological narrative. And so there were a few poems that I didn't read tonight that were fixed points in historical time. This is fall 2016. So there's a whole bunch of poems in November that are specifically about the pre and post, the aftermath of the election, about Kristallnacht, which happened to also be the anniversary of that was the night before the election or something like that, very close. Mm-hmm. There's a Valentine's Day poem in here. There's a Passover poem and a poem for the end of the high holidays. So those, the dates are correct on the calendar. Those kind of became the ones that could not move. I did do a lot of rearranging once I cut, because once I pulled, maybe 30 or 40 pages out of this manuscript, there were big narrative gaps in some sections and overflow in others. I had a summer that was 30 poems and a fall that was 15. So I sort of had to think, okay, I can't reinvent time in the order that time happens or when seasons are. So I need to actually start thinking about how this would progress for a reader who probably would not understand or find sensical, a sort of imbalanced order. So I probably pulled a third to a half of my original draft. And some of that was just that at one point I tried writing letters from Naomi to the speaker and felt that it kind of punctured the deep interiority of the book. I tried writing more after the end of the book and realized that I didn't have as much. I kind of wanted it to end where it ended. But the order happened in a way that, like I said, I can't imagine. I will be the poet with the papers on the floor for the next whatever many collections. Can't imagine writing a book in a chronology ever again. This book really surprised me formally. So, yeah.
Somewhat related, I was lamenting on Twitter how anyone ever writes a second book. That
so real.
Took letter writing as a kind of a way to start generating poems during a difficult writing time in your life. Can you talk about the letter as a form that freed you up and helped you unlock a lot of world for your next book?
Yeah, there's something deeply paradoxical about the epistolary poem, right? It is both intensely intimate and private and public in as much as it's intended to be sent out, right? It is a document, at least on premise, that you would send to another person. It is not truly private. And I was really craving that intimacy and had not yet faced the consequences of the public part. And to your point earlier about the speaker and the poet, my plan for this book, before I had really been more honest with myself about my sexuality, was to just say the speaker's not the poet a bunch and then hide behind a curtain. Not correct or recommended. I know we've all had that impulse though, right? With those of us who write really close to ourselves, we have that sort of weird fluidity as poets, this isn't me, and you have to live in that space, and that doesn't, like you said, Ruth, that's not quite how I operate either. So the thing that I really liked energetically about this project when I was writing is when I sat down and made myself get to the mat, right in front of the computer, I had a place to start because I knew what I was writing. I was writing a letter. I knew who I was writing to. The blank page and the sort of churning brain didn't feel as intimidating because I had a structure, which has never been the case before. And now the very, very tentative new things I'm working on are also, they're kind of their own forms too. They're not letters. They're not, they're that back in that lyric free verse space that I was previously working in. So I think that did help. It also really helped to sort of take a step back from it's hard to find homes for second books. And part of that is the semi screwed up model in which we publish poetry. And that is its own probably 3-hour panel rant. And I won't go into that, but I felt a lot of excitement. And, my first book came out through a contest like so many do. And then it was what happens next? How do you find a home for a book that is different than your first book and is untethered to a press or untethered to a waiting editor? And for me, the one poem at a time approach was ultimately what got me through the first draft. The other thing that got me through from the first draft to later drafts was just having readers that were eager for it, like friends, people that I have on my, that I always send my work to. I had said sometimes in despair, like nobody will ever care if I ever publish another book again. And I always had five or six dear friend readers who were like, well, we care, so you better sit down and get to work. I was like, okay, that's, that feels good. Good to know. But it is it's a very specific space. And there's a lot of ambiguity, I think, in the poetry community about like what it means to emerge and when you're emerging and when you're mid-career. And book 2 is sort of in that neither nor space. And I think writing a book that was a huge departure for me formally just gave me a lot of freedom to say, like, I'm just jumping off of I'm taking a big leap here and I'm doing something totally different. And that's kind of freed me from some of those anxieties. The rest of them are, like I said, I just carry them all around in a backpack, but it helped.
There's definitely like a 3-hour conversation we could have about the state of poetry publishing and how and just the anxiety around, like, should the next thing be like the last thing, or should it be totally different, or should it be like what else is being published, or should it be not like the other things that are being published? I mean, I do think we all kind of get so much in our own heads about what the next thing should be. I'm curious, as someone who, like my next book, I think I took 50 poems out that are not, because, like that thing happens where I wasn't working in Scrivener, I was just working in Word docs. So I ended up just printing everything out since the last book. And I'm like, do I have anything here that I could assemble together into a thing? So what do you do? Like, what happens to the overflow from a book that is really a project book? I mean, like, what happens to the epistolary poems that didn't, that are still sort of like waiting on the bench and didn't get called up into the game? Like, I'm just so curious about how people deal with the sort of like beautiful scraps of the work that doesn't make it into the book. I mean, are there lines or images, or would you consider repurposing some of the poems that you like best into maybe a form or something that could be used in the next thing? Or, I mean, I realize this is sort of like how the sausage is made question, but I'm so curious about what happens to all that really good stuff that just doesn't make this particular thing.
Yeah, well, some of it is not really good stuff. And that is also, we all know that happens, right? Like I was writing every day, 3 to 4 days a week for a year. A lot of it was not that it was like, it was pre-good or bad. It never needed to grow to, enough. Once I hit a certain point with the manuscript, I was like, these little proto poems, maybe will not grow further. And some of them, I wrote a few really bad poems in this manuscript. I've always, that's part of the joy of it, I think, is when you're really hitting your stride and you're seeing a cohesive project come together, it's also easier to see when something fails. And that's liberating in its own way. I have been thinking about this a little bit. There certainly isn't a way to like bring whole poems into a new project because they are, they really do live in this world and not so well in other worlds. I think there will be some salvaging for parts, for sure. I haven't really looked into that Scrivener document, to be honest, probably since 2018, when I kind of, I don't know, for me, there's a certain point at which I go from Scrivener to Word, and then anything that was left behind in Scrivener is in the old project, and then you have the book, Word file, and that's the one that goes to your friends, and kind of the work stays there. But there is one the other, I don't know, tricky thing about being immediately post-publication, and especially for me after COVID, because I haven't been writing very much, is people ask you for work when you have a book out and you're like, I got nothing. I have no new work. But one cool thing that has been able to happen is I have repurposed a couple of like what I'm now calling B-sides from the book that will be places that didn't fit in the book for whatever reason, but were still poems that I believed in. They maybe were just too repetitive narratively, or were a little too overt in like explaining something, but that as solo objects, they make a nice like companion piece. Yeah, I love the sausage questions. Like that's always my, like I really dig that. I'm trying to think about if I I do want to stress that like most of what I write in those early moments in that first year or two of working on a project, I consider compost. I don't really very rarely do you write a tulip or a daisy like in its whole perfect form. I'm usually writing things to plant things in for later. And this book is definitely no exception for that. Like that, a lot of those early poems are in the best possible way, literally like they're shit that then something beautiful came from, but they're not, they're extinct in that way.
I just say,
genius.
I'm so flabbergasted at this idea of overflow. Anytime I actually work up the courage and will to sit down and write something, I treat it like it's gold. Like I will revise it for years until it's something if it's trash. But like I'm such a Grinch. Like I hold on to every little thing. It's terrible.
I get that. I've written, I don't know, 100 words that weren't for a job, like that weren't for work that I was paid to do as a freelancer. In terms of poetry, I feel that way right now because I'm like, even if this is unsalvageable, it is all I have, and I will hold it close and I will worry it into something beautiful later. But it is not. This has been a fallow year for me for sure. Hoping that I've started writing again in that sort of early morning mode by hand, which is a new one for me. Just looking at my computer now, this is not a creative space anymore. COVID killed the computer as a space of creativity. So now I work in a notebook, which is cool.
I love that. I've always done that. I actually don't know how to type. So I only type with these two fingers. So if I were counting on these two fingers to do anything, I wouldn't really write very much. I have to. I love that you're handwriting, and I have a feeling probably the poems will be different because of it.
Yeah. I think there's a lot. I don't know what's happening right now, but I have a lot to unpack over this last year. I'm sure everyone's feeling that way, where I was definitely sponging a lot, even if I wasn't writing, that I can feel inside of me that I need to put down. And this may be a little heavy-handed, but it is true. The notebook I've been writing in is one that my therapist had suggested I buy. It's like an anti-anxiety workbook. And I've just been writing, instead of doing the exercises that I'm supposed to be doing, I've just been free writing in the margins and around all of the rate your anxiety from 1 to 10. And I'm like, this poem's a 7. And that's just been, I'm like, this is weird. And I need it to be weird. But it is cool to have a reason to be weird. And right now the blank page is the blank computer screen is just no, this is where you have meetings and check your email. It is not a place where you create art anymore. Maybe that'll change.
This poem's a 7 is my favorite line.
Yes, I love that. What is this notebook? It sounds.
Well, you'll probably so I got sold it. I had told my therapist about it. She suggested I buy it, but I got targeted on Instagram. So in about 3 hours, every single person watching this streaming is going to be advertising
around our devices.
Yeah,
so now it's
I don't even need to link it because it's all, and it's it's a beautiful hardcover journal. And I bought it because I was sad and was, I don't know how made a lot of weird impulse purchases alone in this apartment over the last year. And that was one of them. And then brought it in and virtually brought it in. I was like, can you justify retroactively that I bought this to use in my therapy? And she was like, sure, fine. If that's what you need, I'll give it to you. So yeah, it's for anybody who's ever done cognitive behavioral therapy work, I think it's specifically designed for that, to sort of process and name and kind of navigate your emotional states. But I'm kind of just enjoying it as I'm being bad at my therapy homework kind of a thing, and it's been fun. But it is literally called the Anti-Anxiety Notebook, or Notebooks, I can't remember. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're nearing the end of our time together. I'm so sad. And I really want to hear that 3-hour conversation about the state of poetry publishing, as someone who used to work in poetry publishing and who sells poetry now. So I look forward to the next AWP panel on that. I want to thank you all for joining me here tonight, but I do want to say, if you have any final words, I'd love to hear, or anything you want to share. No pressure either.
Rachel, what's your next event?
Oh yeah, so next Wednesday, which is the 19th, I think that's right. I am reading with Amelia Phillips, who also has a recently released incredible 2021 poetry collection. We are reading at Scuppernong Books in Amelia's town of Greensboro, North Carolina. And I think it's 7 p.m. Eastern. As someone in Central Time, my greatest fear is just totally botching the time zone difference, but don't quote me on that. It's on all the various, like, it's on the link on my website. And Amelia's book, if you haven't gotten it already, Embouchure, is an absolute triumph, and it is queer as hell and so smart. And I'm just very excited to read with her. She was somebody who helped me work on this book too, so it should be a nice, good time for sure. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you again, and I wanna hold up this book again and say, make sure you get it here or any other independent bookstore. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. All right. Until next time. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, all.